"I told you you needed a wife," said the matchmaker to the widowed rancher cradling his newborn alone. Montana Territory, spring 1871. The prairie wind swept across the open land like a restless spirit, carrying the scent of dry grass, woods, and distant storms. At the edge of Willow Creek, nestled against rolling hills, stood the Mallory Ranch, quiet, save for the cry of a newborn. Clara Bellwright adjusted her hat and marched up the dusty path, clipboard and folded list in hand. The house came into view, a weathered wooden homestead, shutters drawn, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. The door opened before she knocked. Luke Mallory stood there, tall and hollow-eyed, the baby bundled in his arms. His shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled, a stain of milk darkening the front. The infant whimpered softly beneath the blanket. Clara didn't hesitate. "You need a wife, not just a wet nurse." Luke stared. "Morning to you, too." "I brought 3 names," she said, stepping forward. "All good women, respectable, capable, willing to relocate. One's a widow, another ran a schoolhouse, the third—" "I am not hiring a wife," he cut in. "I need someone to feed her, watch her while I work, not someone to share my bed or redecorate my kitchen." Clara planted herself firmly on the step. "You have not slept in 2 days. You are holding that child like your arms might give out. I have known you long enough to see when something's tearing you apart." "I did not ask for a sermon," he muttered, adjusting the baby. "She deserves more than survival," Clara said, her voice softening. "So do you." Luke looked down at the infant, who let out a small hiccup and went quiet. "I am not replacing my wife," he said. "I buried her last week." "I know," Clara said. "And I am not asking you to forget her, but you cannot carry this alone." He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Wait for the girl to arrive if you like. Stay in the spare room. But I am not making promises." Clara stepped inside, boots tapping the wood floor. "I do not ask for promises," she said, "just that you do not shut the door on help when it knocks." The house smelled like ash and milk. Dishes stacked by the basin, blankets piled on a chair, the air thick with silence and grief. Luke paced until the baby calmed, then laid her gently in a basket near the fire. He faced Clara. "Let us be clear," he said. "You are not here to match me." Clara tilted her head. "You posted a notice for a caretaker, and I sent women who are more than hands and milk," she said. "I have matched ranchers with women who now run businesses. I know what kind of woman fits what kind of life." He said nothing. "She was a school teacher, was she not?" Clara asked gently. "Mary." He nodded. "She would not want you to break over this," she said. Luke's eyes darkened. "Do not speak for Mary. You never knew her." "No," Clara agreed. "But I see what she left behind," the baby cried. Luke lifted her, hand trembling. "Fine," he said after a pause. "You can stay until the first girl arrives. But I am not part of some romantic plan. I will keep your floors clean and your baby warm," Clara said, stepping into the kitchen. "Ignore the rest." As the day waned, she made herself useful, stoking the fire, preparing stew, washing bottles. She watched him quietly, the tenderness with the child, the clenched jaw when he passed the crib. That night, standing at the window with tea in hand, she spoke again. "You know none of them will pass your test." "What test?" he asked from the chair. "Being her mother without being your wife," he said. "Nothing." And in the hush that followed, something shifted. Not love, but the first flicker of something that could be. The first night came heavy and long. Clara stood at the basin with sleeves rolled, staring down at the tiny bottle in her hands like it was a piece of unprimed machinery. The water had boiled. The formula was measured, but the act of mixing and testing the temperature, checking her wrist like she had seen mothers do, felt like stepping onto thin ice. Behind her, Luke paced the floor with the baby pressed against his chest. She was fussing again, those small, hiccupy cries that climbed into the air like smoke. Luke's jaw twitched, his arms moving in awkward circles. "Does she always cry like that?" Clara asked, watching him from the corner of her eye. "She cries when she is hungry. She cries when she is not," Luke muttered. "I have tried rocking, pacing, humming hymns. Nothing works for long." He paused, looking down. "I think she misses her mother." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat and turned back to the bottle. "So do you," she said softly. He said nothing. The baby wailed louder. Clara hurried over, holding out the bottle. Luke took it, tested the nipple against his palm, then gently coaxed it into the baby's mouth. She sucked for a moment, then pushed it away, wailing anew. Clara flinched. "Maybe I can try." He nodded once, stepping back. Cradling the child felt foreign. Clara had matched dozens of women to men with children, advised them on how to win affection, how to blend families, but she had never held a baby herself. Not like this. "Hello," she whispered, her voice gentler than she expected. "I am Clara. You are very small." The child blinked up at her, lip trembling, eyes glassy with confusion. Clara began walking, her boots slow on the floorboards. "Would you like a story?" "I used to tell tales to the daughters of my clients, though most were older than you." She started with a simple one. A story about a bird who lost her nest in a windstorm and found it again among the roots of a kind old oak. Her voice softened with each word, rising and falling like a lullaby. Luke watched from the chair, elbows on knees, silent. By the time she finished the second story, the baby had quieted. Clara looked down. Those tiny eyes had closed. She exhaled, barely realizing she had been holding her breath. "Try putting her in the basket," Luke said quietly. Clara nodded and lowered the baby slowly, adjusting the quilt around her. She stood back, arms folded tightly across her chest, her body still thrumming with nervous energy. Luke stepped forward, adjusted the edge of the blanket just so. Then he turned to Clara. "You did well," he said. She gave a half smile. "Beginner's luck?" That night they both took seats by the fire, 2 chairs angled toward the basket. Neither said much. The room ticked with small sounds, the pop of firewood, the hiss of wind against the windows, the soft suckle noises of the baby stirring in. Her sleep. Clara wrapped herself in a shawl and curled sideways, feet tucked beneath her. Luke leaned back with arms crossed, eyes half closed but never fully resting. They took turns watching the child. When she fussed, one would rise, soothe her, then sit again. Hours passed like this. Near midnight, Clara dozed off in her chair, a book slipping from her lap. Luke looked over, hesitated, then stood slowly. He moved to the coat rack, took down, his own worn jacket lined with wool and heavy from years of wear. Gently, he draped it over her shoulders. She stirred but did not wake. He paused. His hand hovered near her hair for a moment too long, as if debating something. Then he turned away, went back to the fire, and resumed his quiet vigil. Outside, the storm clouds gathered, but inside the house had found its rhythm. Not peace, not yet, but perhaps something close. By the end of the first week, Clara had taken over half the chores without meaning to. She swept the floors, mended a curtain, scrubbed the porch steps, and even raked hay outside the barn. She learned how to boil milk without scorching it, and how to swaddle a baby with one hand while the other stirred a pot. Luke noticed. He said nothing, but the wood pile never ran out. The tools she used were always clean, and when she coughed, once during morning feeding, a cup of honey tea mysteriously appeared beside her chair. They fell into rhythm. Not harmony, but rhythm. Then the women began to arrive. The first came from Gallatin Margaret, a sturdy widow in her 30s, with sunburned cheeks and a brisk voice. She held the baby like she was testing a melon for ripeness, and frowned when Clara handed her the bottle. "She cries too much," she said. The second was younger, prettier. She wore perfume, too much of it. She smiled at Luke like she already owned the deed to his land. The baby wailed when she tried to sing. The third, quiet, polite, barely spoke 2 sentences before Luke thanked her for her time. Clara stood on the porch after the last one left, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Luke leaned against the rail, rocking the baby. "You sent her away too," Clara said, voice tight. "She was not right," Luke replied. "No," Clara snapped. "She was not Mary." He looked at her then, eyes shadowed. "I am not trying to replace her," Clara said. "But you are. Not trying to let anyone stay either. I am protecting my daughter from what? Being cared for, being loved again." The silence stretched between them. "You do not need another woman," she said finally, her voice dropping. "You just do not want to admit that you need me." Luke flinched, not visibly, but something in his jaw shifted, his grip tightening slightly on the child. He did not answer, but his eyes, those storm-colored eyes, met hers with a depth she could not ignore. She stepped back inside, the screen door slamming behind her. Later that night, Clara stood by the cradle. The baby was quiet now, cheeks pink and full, fingers curled near her chin. "She is beautiful," Clara whispered. Luke from the chair behind her spoke softly. "She looks like her mother." Clara nodded. "What is her name?" Silence. She turned, brows drawing. "Luke?" He looked down at the fire. "She does not have one." "You mean you have not chosen yet?" "No." Clara blinked, stunned. "She is almost 2 weeks old." "I know. Why?" His voice was low. "Because if I name her, I will love her like I loved Mary. And if I love her like that," he swallowed, "then I can lose her too." Clara's heart ached at the raw truth in his words. He stepped closer. "Luke, child cannot grow up nameless. I know she deserves more than your fear." He looked at her, and there was pain in his expression. "Yes, but something else too. Trust." She reached down and gently brushed a hand over the baby's curls. "I am not asking you to stop grieving, Clara," said. "But she is here. She is alive. That is worth something." Luke looked at the child long and hard, then almost in a whisper he asked, "What would you name her?" Clara paused. Vin smiled. "I do not know yet, but something that means hope, because that is what she is, whether you are ready or not." Clara had been searching for sewing needles when she found the box. It was tucked beneath a stack of wool blankets in the corner of Luke's wardrobe, an old tin battered at the corners, the kind soldiers used to carry tobacco or coins. It looked forgotten, or maybe hidden. She paused, then lifted it gently. Inside were letters. Dozens, maybe more, all folded carefully, most, yellowing with age. The top one was dated 1869. The handwriting was bold, if slightly uneven. She read the first line. "My dearest Mary, the nights are cold without you." Clara felt her breath catch. These were letters, love letters, from when Luke had been away fighting in the war. He must have written them to his wife and never mailed them. She flipped through them slowly. Some were stained with what might have been ash. Others had words scratched out with deep, angry lines. Near the bottom was a newer envelope, creased and worn. No stamp, No address. Curiosity and dread braided together in her chest. She opened it. The handwriting was shakier this time. Mary, I do not know how to talk to you now that you are gone. They say grief is like a storm, but no one warns you that it also makes you quiet, that it makes your hands useless, that I do not know what to name our daughter because I am afraid she will take your place in me, and I cannot survive losing you twice. Clara closed the letter slowly, her fingers trembling. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned. Luke stood in the doorway. His face was unreadable, his eyes locked on the letter in her hand. "What are you doing?" She faltered, then lifted the envelope. "I was looking for thread. I found this." He crossed the room in 3 strides and snatched the letter from her hand. Jaw clenched. "You had no right. You left it unsent, unhidden. It was not meant for anyone else." Clara held her ground. "It was meant for her, and she is gone." Luke stepped back, letter crushed in his hand. "I did not mean to pry," Clara said softer now. "But I read it, and I think she would have wanted you to send it." He laughed bitter and low. "You think you understand any of this? That because you have washed a few bottles and rocked her to sleep, you know what this house holds? I know it holds a man who is drowning," she snapped, stepping forward, "who is scared of loving his child because he thinks it will undo him, who looks at me like I am offering something dangerous when all I have ever offered is help. I never ask for help." "No," she said, "because asking means admitting you might want something again, that you might care." His voice rose. "You do not know what I have lost." Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "You think I have not lost anything?" Silence. She took a breath. "I came west because there was no one left to stay east for. My mother died in childbirth. My father drank himself dead. I spent 5 years matching people who still had hope while telling myself I did not need any." Luke looked away. "But I do, Clara," continued. "And so do you. You are just too afraid to say it." He stared at her, breathing shallow, the letter crumpled in his fist. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room, his boots heavy against the floor. Clara stood alone, heart pounding, the echo of his grief still thick in the air. She looked down at the box of letters, and despite everything, she smiled. Because no man writes to the dead, unless part of him still wants to live, Clara packed in silence. The morning sun filtered weakly through the kitchen window, casting soft streaks across the table where she had once fed the baby, once rolled. Doe once sat with a cup of tea cooling in her hand. Now her satchel lay open beside the stove, and every sound, every click of a buckle, every fold of cloth seemed too loud in the quiet. She had made up her mind the night before it was time to go. She had stayed long past what was proper. Long, past what was smart, and it had started to hurt. The girl who prided herself on knowing where hearts belonged had finally stepped into a place she could not read. Luke Mallory was kind but broken, strong but closed. His love had not died with Mary. It had simply been locked away where Clara could not reach. She placed the final item on the table before leaving. A folded sheet of paper, the last list, names, locations, ages, all written in her careful, tidy hand. But this time, for the first time, hers was not among them. No final name, no secret, hope. She closed the door softly behind her. The prairie stretched wide ahead, the wind cool and rising. The horse waited patiently, saddled and ready. Clara mounted, the weight of goodbye pressing heavy against her shoulders. Then the baby's cry pierced the air. She paused. The sound was raw, not the usual fussing or hunger. It was full-bodied wailing, high and panicked, like grief made small. The door burst open. Luke stood in the frame, hair unkempt, boots half-laced, the baby red-faced and flailing in his arms. His eyes were wide, not with anger, not with frustration, but helplessness. "She won't stop," he said, breath ragged. She only stops crying when you're here. Clara stared, frozen in the saddle. Every time I try, he went on. I hold her, rock her, feed her. Nothing works. Not since you started caring for her. I should not have stayed this long, Clara said softly. Maybe, he replied, but you did. The wind blew gently between them, stirring dust and silence. I read that list, he added. You did not put your name down. No, she said, because I knew you would not pick it. Luke stepped forward, the baby wailing in his arms, her little fists curled tight. I do not want a name on a list, he said. I do not want someone chosen like a tool off a shelf. Then what do you want? I want you, he said. You who did not flinch when I broke. You who sat up with her when I could not stand another hour. You who read my worst words and stayed anyway. Clara slid down from the saddle, eyes wide. You are talking about me? She asked, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. Luke met her gaze. I do not need you to make me a match, he said. I need you to make this a home. I need you to stay, not because I'm falling apart, but because I finally want something whole. Clara pressed her cheek gently to the baby's downy hair, and Luke Mallory stood before her, a man no longer drowning but reaching slowly, finally, for shore. The snow began falling by dusk. By nightfall, it had become a storm. Wind howled against the windows of the Mallory ranch, rattling shutters and piling drifts along the porch. Smoke billowed thick from the chimney, curling against a sky gone white. Inside, the cabin glowed dimly. Luke was pacing the kitchen floor, the baby limp in his arms, cheeks flushed with fever. Her breathing came shallow, her skin hot beneath the blanket. Panic edged his every step. When the knock came, it was almost lost in the roar of the wind. He turned, startled. A second knock, firmer, and Luke opened the door into a wall of snow. And there she stood, Clara, hat pulled low, cheeks red, cloak-dusted white. She stepped in without a word and closed the door behind her. He stared, stunned. I saw the clouds rolling in, she said simply, and I could not stay away. His voice cracked. She's sick. Clara stepped forward, already unwinding her scarf. Then let us help her. No time for questions, no space for pride. They moved together. Luke fed logs to the fire while Clara stripped off her wet cloak, took the baby, and wrapped her in warm flannel. He boiled water on the stove. She soaked cloths and pressed them to the baby's neck and forehead. They made broth, poured it into a tiny spoon, coaxed the baby to swallow even a drop. She was fine this morning, Luke said hoarsely, kneeling beside the crib. Then she started crying, and then she went quiet. Clara touched his arm. You did not do anything wrong. I should have known. You are learning, she said gently. So am I. The storm battered the walls, whistling through every crack, but the fire held. By midnight, the baby finally slept, though fitfully. Luke collapsed into the rocker. Clara curled on the rug beside the fire, the child against her chest. The silence was full, not heavy, not strained, but intimate, shared. Luke leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He never had a name, he said. Clara looked up, surprised. I could not bring myself to choose one. Mary and I, we had talked about names, but none of them fit after she was gone. Nothing felt right. The fire popped softly. Luke's gaze rested on Clara, then on the baby in her arms. Until now, Clara blinked. Her name is Hope, he said quietly. You gave her that. The words landed gently, but they went deep. Clara turned her face slightly, pressing her cheek to the baby's downy hair. Her eyes shimmered, and for the first time in a long while, tears slipped free, quiet, unannounced. Not from pain, not from fear, but from being seen. from being trusted with something as sacred as a name. "I've matched hundreds," she whispered, "helped people begin new lives. But I have never named anything before." Luke's voice was soft. "You do not need to be a mother to give something meaning." She looked at him. "But maybe I am becoming one," she said. The fire crackled. The storm raged. But inside there was warmth and quiet, and the fragile start of something that neither of them had known how to name until now. Spring turned to summer. The grass grew taller along the fence lines, and the sound of laughter, small and bright, began to echo between the barn and the porch. Hope was nearly crawling now, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the sofa while her parents took turns encouraging her forward. Clara Bell Wright, no longer just Clara, no longer a matchmaker, had settled into the role she never saw, but somehow fit into, like she had been carved for it. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread more often than not. There were wildflowers in a tin on the table, sometimes picked by Luke on his way back from the northern pasture, sometimes by Clara herself after feeding the chickens. There were still sleepless nights and chores piled high, but the ranch felt lived in now, not just endured. Luke had taken to fixing the porch railing in the evenings. Hope cradled in a sling across his chest. Clara teased him that he looked too domestic for an old cowboy. He only shrugged. "I figure I earned the right to fix my own porch without falling through it." Clara no longer kept her lists. The pages were tucked away, folded neat in a drawer. Once she had measured life by matches made and weddings attended. Now she measured it in spoons of porridge, soft lullabies, the weight of Luke's hand on hers, beneath the stars. One quiet afternoon, while Hope napped and Luke was mending a fence in the west field, Clara sat by the window with paper in her lap. She began to write, not to a client, not to an agency, but to herself. "Dear Clara, the you from a year ago, who believed she had to prove something to the world, who thought love was a job to manage, a puzzle to solve. You did not choose wrong. You simply found the one man who was never looking, and somehow he found you too." She paused, tears prickling. "You were never just a matchmaker. You were always someone waiting for a place to belong. And now you have one, not because you chased it, but because you stayed long enough to let it grow." She signed her name, Clara Mallory. Later that week, Luke surprised her. "We are going to town," he said, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Wear something you do not mind being remembered in." "When?" she asked, holding Hope in her arms. He met her eyes. "Because we are getting our photograph taken properly? The three of us." Clara laughed softly, blinking in surprise. "You hate photographers." "I do," Luke agreed. "But I figure it is time this girl had a family photo, one we do not have to imagine." At the small photo studio in town, the baby squirmed and drooled. Clara wore her blue dress, the one with the tiny buttons Luke always fumbled with. Luke stood tall in his cleanest shirt, freshly shaved, his hair slicked back awkwardly. He looked uncomfortable until Clara nudged his arm, and Hope tugged his sleeve. And then, just for a moment, he smiled. Not the stiff smile of obligation, but a real one. The photograph took only seconds, but it captured something that had taken a year to build. That evening, Clara placed the finished photo gently into the wooden box Luke once used for unsent letters. She tucked it next to the faded pages he had written to Mary, the woman he had loved and lost. She whispered, "You would have liked her," and closed the lid. Luke found her on the porch afterward, arms wrapped around herself as the breeze picked up. He joined her, handed her a mug of tea. "She looks like you," he said, nodding toward the window where Hope slept in her crib. "She has your stubbornness," Clara replied, smiling. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip behind. "The hills!" "You really are done matchmaking?" he asked eventually. Clara turned to him. "I found the only match I ever needed." Luke chuckled. Took you long enough. I was waiting for the one man who refused to be matched. He reached for her hand, pulled it gently into his lap. I did not know how to ask for you. You did not have to, she whispered. And there, with the stars beginning to blink into view, the baby safe inside and their photo resting beside the words of a man learning to love again, they sat, not posing, not pretending, just being. And for the first time, it felt like forever had already begun. Thank you for joining us through every tender moment of I told you you needed a wife, said the matchmaker to the widowed rancher cradling his newborn alone. If you believe like we, do that love can grow from kindness and heal through shared grief, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Each week we bring you heartwarming, deeply emotional tales from the rugged American West. Don't forget to like, share, and tell us in the comments which moment touched you most. We'll see you next time here on Wild West Stories.